You know the names of the famous generals, but not the men who bled in the mud and disappeared from history. This is the story of the Americans who won World War I and were erased from it. In the final years of the 19th century, the United States was still viewed by Europe as a young industrial nation, ambitious but untested. It had factories, railroads, and a booming immigrant workforce, but it did not yet have the reputation of a global military power. Old empires dismissed it as inexperienced. European generals believed that modern war was their arena, not America's. And then came the Great War, a conflict that rewrote the world. World War I was supposed to be short, decisive, and glorious. Instead, it became a grinding nightmare of mud, disease, and artillery. The Western Front stalled into a static line of trenches, stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea, men trapped in a landscape of rot and wire. For years, neither side gained more than inches. Europe bled. America watched. At first, the U.S. attempted neutrality, a distant observer of a war that consumed millions. But neutrality could not withstand the ruthlessness unfolding across the Atlantic. German U-boats began sinking ships indiscriminately. American citizens died in the ocean without warning. Germany sent the Zimmermann telegram to Mexico, promising U.S. territory if Mexico joined their side. The illusion of distance shattered. In April 1917, the United States entered World War I. European leaders expected American numbers to matter, perhaps American industry. What they did not expect, what no one anticipated, was that unknown Americans, ordinary men and women, would reshape the war through invention, courage, and innovation, not generals. Not politicians, not famous names people history forgot, mechanics, engineers, aviators, nurses, black soldiers who fought for a country that still segregated them, immigrant soldiers who volunteered despite not being considered American citizens, scientists who stepped out of universities and into the chaos of war. These are the stories of unknown American heroes who didn't just fight World War I, they changed its outcome. The first of them was a doctor who faced a storm of blood and infection that European medical systems couldn't control. His name was Dr. William C. Gorgas. Gorgas wasn't a battlefield surgeon. He wasn't assigned to the front lines. His weapon wasn't a rifle or artillery battery. It was something far more powerful: sanitation. During the construction of the Panama Canal, Gorgas had waged war against yellow fever and malaria, proving that disease could be defeated by draining standing water, cleaning barracks, and attacking the breeding grounds of mosquitoes. When the United States entered World War I, American troops began flooding into training camps. Thousands of men crowded into tight spaces, sleeping on bunks, coughing, sharing food, equipment, and water. Disease erupted almost immediately. Pneumonia swept the camps. Tuberculosis followed. The flu exploded into a monster that would kill more people than bullets. Other nations saw disease as inevitable. They accepted sickness as part of war. Gorgas refused. He inspected camps like a general inspecting defensive positions. He demanded kitchens be sterilized, laundry be done, sick men isolated, latrines placed far from food and water sources. Military officers rolled their eyes. Doctors complained that they were soldiers, not janitors. And then the numbers came in. Camp sickness dropped. Infection rates fell. Troop readiness skyrocketed. Gorgas had discovered something fundamental. In modern warfare, the army that stays healthy wins. He changed military medical science forever. He never fired a weapon. Yet he ensured that American troops reached the front line strong, organized, and alive. Historians rarely place his name next to famous generals. They should, because you cannot win a war with soldiers who never make it to battle. The next unknown hero didn't work in a hospital. He worked in a barn. His name was John Jack Pershing Jr., but everyone knew him for something simpler. He was the man who redesigned the horseshoe. It sounds absurd. It sounds ridiculous. But World War I ground horses to death by the thousands. Artillery, ammunition, food, and supplies were moved not by trucks, but by horses. Horses were the engines of the war. Mud, shattered terrain, barbed wire, and the constant pounding of artillery destroyed their hooves. European horses were dying faster than they could be replaced, but Pershing, a farrier from Missouri, developed a new kind of horseshoe fitted with removable cleats. It acted like winter tread on vehicle tires. Instead of slipping or sinking into mud, a horse could dig into terrain and pull artillery that would have otherwise been stuck. Pershing believed that a horseshoe could win battles. He was right. American artillery moved faster. Supply lines stayed active longer. Ammunition reached firing positions on time. It seems small, one farmer's innovation, yet it directly increased artillery firepower on the front. $1 million problem solved by a blacksmith. Pershing never appears in history textbooks. But artillery wins wars, and artillery moves on horses. The next American hero changed communication forever. Before WWI, radios were unpredictable. Wired telephone lines were easily cut by artillery. Messages took too long to travel by courier. Armies struggled to coordinate attacks across trenches. Enter a young engineer from Minnesota, a quiet man named Edwin Armstrong. While other inventors experimented with wireless telegraphs, Armstrong pursued something radically different: amplifying radio signals. He created the regenerative radio circuit, a design that allowed radios to pick up signals from far distances with clarity no one had achieved before. His invention made battlefield radio communication possible. Without Armstrong, American units would have been blind. Generals could now coordinate artillery, infantry, and aircraft with precision. Plans could change mid-battle. Troops could respond to German movements instantly instead of waiting for runners to sprint through machine gun fire. Armstrong became the invisible voice of the American military. His invention later evolved into FM radio. FM radio later became the backbone of broadcast communication. Because a quiet engineer refused to accept silence on the battlefield, but perhaps the most extraordinary unknown American heroes did not speak at all, and because their voices were the weapon. They were the Choctaw code talkers. Long before the Navajo code talkers of World War II became famous, a group of young Native American soldiers stepped into history during World War I. Germans broke Allied codes easily. They intercepted messages, decoded them, and adjusted their defenses. But German intelligence had no defense against a language they had never heard and could not possibly learn. In late 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest American operation of the war, Choctaw soldiers began transmitting orders in their native language through field telephones and radio. Suddenly, German forces were blind. Within a day, American units were maneuvering faster. Within 2 days, Germany lost track of troop movements. Within 3 days, the front collapsed. A language that had once been suppressed, banned in American schools, became a military secret that helped win a war. The Choctaw code talkers received no recognition. Not medals, not citations, not even public acknowledgement until decades later. They changed warfare. They were forgotten. The next unknown hero wasn't born in the United States. He chose the United States. His name was Frank Luke Jr., a son of German immigrants, a kid with a temper and no interest in following rules. When he went to France as a pilot, he was arrogant, impulsive, and occasionally insubordinate. His commanders doubted him, but Luke didn't want to shoot down other fighters. He wanted to do something more dangerous: destroy German observation balloons. These balloons weren't harmless. They were fortified intelligence platforms protected by anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and fighter patrols. Shooting one down required flying straight into enemy fire. Most pilots refused to attempt it. Luke destroyed 14 balloons and 4 aircraft in just 17 days. He became known as the Balloon Buster. On his final mission, wounded and alone behind enemy lines, he landed his plane next to a river. Surrounded by German soldiers demanding his surrender, he pulled his pistol and fought until the end. Luke died at 21 years old, a hero the world barely remembers. And then there were the African American soldiers of the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, not allowed to fight with white American units, issued French helmets and French rifles, placed under French command because their own country refused to treat them as equals. Yet they were the longest-serving American combat unit on the front line, 191 days under fire. While other units rotated out, they held. Private Henry Johnson fought off a German raiding party alone, armed with only a rifle, a bolo knife, and his fists. He killed or wounded multiple attackers and dragged his wounded comrade to safety. The French awarded him the Croix de Guerre, their highest military honor. The United States gave him nothing. He returned home unrecognized, uncelebrated, and died in poverty. Only decades after his death did America finally award him the Medal of Honor. Some heroes wear medals when they come home. Some wear scars. Some get forgotten. American heroism in the First World War didn't always mean charging across no man's land or wresting control of the sky from an enemy fighter. Sometimes it meant stepping into a problem that no one else wanted to touch. For a man named Charles Steinmetz, the battlefield was an electrical circuit. Electricity in 1914 was still a developing science. Factories were modernizing, hospitals were wiring lights, and industries were slowly learning how to harness electrical power. War, meanwhile, had arrived with industrial brutality. Telegraphs, radios, searchlights, electrically detonated mines. Modern war required electricity the way cavalry once required horses. Steinmetz had a hunch. The army didn't just need soldiers, it needed electricians. He designed an entire curriculum in electrical engineering specifically for wartime. He trained thousands of soldiers in how to wire trenches, maintain generators, repair radios, and run searchlights that scanned night skies for aircraft and zeppelins. While generals drew arrows on maps, Steinmetz mapped out power grids. On the battlefield, electricity meant speed. It enabled telegraph lines that transmitted orders across miles. It powered radio stations. It lit surgical tents in the middle of the night. Electricity was victory, yet Steinmetz never wore a uniform. His classroom was his battlefield, and his students kept the U.S. military running in the dark. Other American heroes changed the war by confronting a different enemy: hunger. Herbert Hoover is remembered today as a president who oversaw economic disaster, but before that, he was a mining engineer and businessman known for reorganizing chaos. When World War I broke out, Hoover was living in London. At that moment, the German army was invading Belgium. Belgian civilians were trapped, starving, and desperate. Hoover took charge. Voluntarily, without pay, he built the Commission for Relief in Belgium, a mission that shipped millions of tons of food into a war zone. European leaders said it was impossible. Hoover proved them wrong. His organization negotiated with German generals and British admirals, ensuring food could cross the ocean without being seized. He fed 11 million civilians. When the United States entered the war, Hoover was appointed head of the U.S. Food Administration. He transformed American agriculture into a wartime engine. Farmers expanded production. Families voluntarily rationed. Slogans appeared everywhere. Food will win the war, and it did. Generals win battles. Hoover kept armies alive. He never carried a rifle. He carried a ledger. Some heroes never even set foot in Europe. Georgia Tech professor Julia O. Flisch had been fighting for women's education long before the war. She believed that American women were capable of skilled industrial labor, something society at the time refused to acknowledge. But war laughs at prejudice. Men left for Europe. Factories emptied. Production slowed. War machines demanded workers. Flisch stepped forward. She designed training programs that taught women industrial skills that were previously reserved for men: machine operation, welding, mechanical drafting. Within months, thousands of American women were working in factories that produced artillery shells, aircraft, uniforms, and vehicles. For the first time in U.S. history, women were being paid to perform industrial work at scale. While the world remembers Rosie the Riveter from World War II, they forget the women who paved that path during World War I. Flisch didn't invent weapons. She invented opportunity. Then came a quiet young man who changed aviation and never got credit. James Clark was a mechanic from Ohio. Before the war, his life revolved around engines, fixing farm tractors, repairing broken automobiles, making machines run no matter what. When he joined the Signal Corps aviation section, he expected to be flying. Instead, he found himself surrounded by wood, canvas, and chaos. American aircraft manufacturing was behind Europe. Planes were being assembled by hand. Engines rattled themselves loose during flight. Bolts snapped. Hoses leaked fuel. Pilots dreaded takeoff. Clark kept noticing the same problem. Engines were being mounted too rigidly. The vibration of flight tore apart the frame. So he developed a flexible mounting system that allowed the engine to move with the aircraft, rather than against it. The vibration stopped. Fuel use stabilized. Maintenance time dropped. Crash rates went down. He saved lives. Pilots wore goggles and leather helmets and earned the glory of the skies. Mechanics like Clark worked in freezing hangars at night under lantern light. They never got their names painted on the fuselage. Without mechanics, no pilot flies. Without Clark's innovation, American aircraft would have remained unreliable. Meanwhile, on the ground, the war demanded muscle, infinite muscle. The thousands of miles of railway supplying Allied forces in France weren't going to build themselves. They required precision, planning, and determination. The U.S. Army turned to the men best suited for the job, railroad engineers. They were not soldiers. They were not trained in combat. They were the laborers and foremen of the American railroad boom, men who understood steel schedules and motion. The 10th, 20th U.S. Railway Engineers units were deployed to France, sometimes under fire, to lay track. Bullets could not stop them. German artillery could not stop them. They worked in pitch darkness, lit only by small lanterns. They built rail lines faster than Kaiser's forces could destroy them. They turned the French countryside into a vast logistical network, capable of delivering artillery shells, food, ammunition, and troops faster than Germany could react. Every rail connection built by the Americans shortened the war. No statue honors them. And then, in a forest in northeastern France, a group of American engineers faced an impossible mission. The Meuse-Argonne offensive required artillery to move fast, faster than ever. But the terrain was brutal, roads destroyed and horses exhausted. The solution? Gas-powered trucks. There was only one problem. They didn't exist in the numbers required. An engineer named George Marshall, not yet the famous general of World War II, coordinated a logistical miracle. He reorganized truck convoys, redesigned supply schedules, and staged equipment to move faster than the enemy could comprehend. Marshall turned chaos into order. His genius wasn't tactics. It was timing. A good plan arrives late and fails. A mediocre plan executed immediately wins. Marshall became the architect of American movement and learned lessons in France that he later used to design the European liberation strategy in World War II. But in World War I, he was practically unknown, just another officer with too much responsibility and too little recognition. Then there were the miners, not coal miners, not iron miners, tunnel miners. Germany's defenses relied on heavily fortified trench positions connected by deep underground bunkers. The British and French had attempted mining operations with mixed success, but German counterminers, trained specifically to detect underground activity, kept finding and destroying their tunnels. American miners, from Pennsylvania, from Colorado, from West Virginia, were different. They had spent their lives carving tunnels in dangerous rock formations. They understood how to move through the earth silently, how to reinforce a tunnel quickly, and how to prevent collapses. The Germans listened for tunnels with stethoscopes. American miners tunneled without sound. When they were close enough to the German bunker system, they packed tunnels with explosives, withdrew quietly, and detonated them at coordinated times. Whole sections of the German line vanished in seconds. The enemy never knew how the Americans got there. For Germany, it must have felt like the earth itself turned against them. The next unknown heroes wielded fire. American flamethrower crews were volunteers. The assignment was considered suicidal. Flamethrowers were heavy, unstable, and a prime target for enemy fire. German flamethrower units had been terrorizing Allied trenches since 1915. An American named Cleo Ross became a legend. During a German attack, Ross and his partner advanced with a flamethrower, clearing trenches and allowing infantry to move forward. In the middle of combat, Ross was hit. Flames burst backward toward him as the tank ruptured. He kept firing, even as he burned alive. He held the trigger until the attack succeeded. He died without recognition. His partner received the Distinguished Service Cross. Ross received nothing. Sometimes, heroism dies before history can write it down. But the war also revealed unseen heroism in science. At Johns Hopkins, a research scientist named Oswald Avery studied pneumonia. While the world obsessed over artillery, gas attacks, and tanks, Avery obsessed over bacteria. He realized that pneumonia was killing far more soldiers than bullets. Avery developed new methods to identify bacterial strains and refine anti-serums more quickly. Medical units adopted his research across Europe. Survival rates improved. Entire units that would have been wiped out by infection returned to duty. Avery didn't know it then, but his research would lead to one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs of the 20th century. The discovery that DNA is the carrier of genetic information. He changed world science and never set foot on the battlefield. Others fought with pens. Journalist Raynal. Bowling left a comfortable legal career at J.P. Morgan to volunteer. Bowling believed aviation would decide the future of warfare. He went to France before the United States entered the war, studied European air organizations, and wrote the ground plan for the American Air Service. Everything, from training systems to aircraft production, to organizational structure, came from Bowling's blueprint. He became the first high-ranking American officer killed in combat in World War I. His ideas built American air power. History gave him a footnote. America entered World War I with no tanks, not few tanks. None. A major named Samuel Rockenbach changed that. He studied every tank in Europe, British, French, and German, and built an American tank corps from scratch. He identified talent. One of his protégés was a young officer named George Patton. Rockenbach trained tank operators who had never seen a tank. He solved problems no manual covered: engines overheating in mud, treads snapping on rocks, men passing out from fumes. He drilled crews relentlessly. American tanks entered the Meuse-Argonne offensive at the exact moment the Allies needed momentum. Rockenbach became the father of U.S. armored forces, yet Patton became the name people remembered. Sometimes, the most unknown heroes were anonymous. During the final months of the war, the Allied advance slowed near the village of Kunel. German snipers, machine guns, and artillery pinned down U.S. units. A 24-year-old corporal named Alvin York, a man who had once tried to avoid the war on religious grounds, was ordered to flank a German machine gun nest. When the firing started, York advanced alone. He moved with the patience of a hunter and the accuracy of a marksman. When German soldiers attempted to rush him, he dropped them one by one, conserving ammunition. At one point, a group of nearly 100 German troops surrendered to him. York walked them back to Allied lines. Stunned soldiers watching as prisoners followed a single man. He became a legend. But the war had thousands of men like him. Nameless, faceless, forgotten, men who advanced when others hid, men who ran toward danger instead of away from it, men whose courage was never recorded. York received the Medal of Honor. Many men just like him were buried without even a cross. Rain hammered the wooden planks of the pier as young American soldiers boarded transport ships. Many had never seen the ocean before. Most had never traveled 20 miles from home. But the world was burning, and they were being sent to extinguish it. They weren't legendary heroes yet. Just farm boys, clerks, postal workers, machinists. Men who could not imagine how much history was about to rest on their shoulders. France felt like another planet. Mud was everywhere. The stench of gas clung to the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Artillery never stopped. Days blurred into nights and nights into hallucinations. The American Expeditionary Force, the AEF, was a gamble. General John Pershing refused to scatter American troops as reinforcements for exhausted French and British divisions. He believed the U.S. must fight as an independent army, or the world would never take America seriously again. Behind him, newspapers mocked him. Politicians doubted him. Most of Europe laughed at the idea of American farmers fighting hardened German stormtroopers. But Pershing had something the others didn't. A nation fueled by fresh energy and unlimited industrial power. America was late to the war, but it was not unprepared. Factories in Pennsylvania lit up the night sky. Detroit built trucks faster than Europe could destroy them. Illinois turned out artillery shells by the millions. And thousands of anonymous Americans, scientists, mechanics, codebreakers, began creating things no army had seen before. Things that would change everything. One of them was a school teacher. A quiet man from Iowa, cursed with hay fever and poor eyesight. His friends joked he'd never make it through basic training. His name was Major Ralph Van Damen. He wasn't a soldier. He was a thinker. A man obsessed with information and patterns. He believed wars were not won only by guns. They were won by information. At the War Department, generals rolled their eyes at him. Intelligence? Code breaking? They said Americans didn't fight wars with cloak and dagger tricks. They needed more rifles, not more paperwork. Van de Man didn't give up. He collected newspaper clippings, mapped ship movements, tracked German agents on U.S. soil, all quietly, all without authorization. Then, in 1917, a German spy ring was caught in New York. Van de Man carried the newspaper headline straight into the Secretary of War's office and said, "This is why we need intelligence." They finally listened. Within weeks, Van de Man built the first U.S. military intelligence organization in history. No fanfare, no press release, no parade, just one office, 3 officers, and a stack of file cabinets. He recruited academics, librarians, women fluent in languages, cryptographers who could see patterns in chaos. For the first time ever, America had an organized intelligence network woven through Europe. The military would later call him the father of U.S. military intelligence, but the world never learned his name. Meanwhile, another unknown American was creating a weapon without bullets. A quiet, soft-spoken Cherokee soldier named Blair Lone Tree joined the Signal Corps. He was good with radios, good with wires, but his true power, his real weapon, was something no German could crack: his native tongue, Cherokee. When Lone Tree spoke into a field phone, operators on the other side of the line understood every word. But German codebreakers had no reference, no cipher, no Rosetta Stone for a language that came from a world they knew nothing about. Messages that would normally take hours to encode and decode were delivered instantly. Right flank advancing. Hold artillery. That simple speed saved lives. His work, and the work of other Native Americans, inspired the U.S. military to expand the idea in the next war. The world remembers the Navajo code talkers of WWI. Almost no one remembers that they were not the first. The first code talker was Cherokee, and his name vanished in the mud of history. Orders were now moving faster. Intelligence was sharper. Factories were roaring, but the war wasn't won yet. 2 more unknown Americans were about to change everything. Men no one expected. Working in fields no one cared about. A doctor who would save more American lives than any general. An engineer who built a weapon so terrifying that Germany called it the devil's paintbrush. Their inventions would tilt the war, and no one knows their names. He never intended to become a hero. He only wanted to stop the bleeding. Dr. William Henry Welch, co-founder of Johns Hopkins Hospital, wasn't a soldier. He had never fired a weapon. He had no interest in the roar of artillery or the thunder of machine guns. He believed that victory in war depended on something much quieter: sterile hands. He watched young men arrive from Europe in hospital ships, arms missing, lungs burned from gas, skin shredded by shrapnel. They didn't die from bullets. They died from infection. Welch knew what most military commanders didn't. A bullet wound doesn't kill you. The bacteria inside it do. Before the war, surgeons often operated without sterilizing tools. Some still believed infection was caused by bad air. Doctors would reuse bandages. Nurses washed scalpels in the same bucket of water. Welch couldn't accept that. In a clean, bright laboratory in Baltimore, he pushed for something radical: mobile sterilization and antiseptic protocol for battlefield surgery. He ordered instruments to be boiled. He demanded rubber gloves. He required masks. He insisted that every wound be cleaned with an alcohol iodine mixture before sutures were placed. Military surgeons scoffed. "Too slow," they said. "We don't have time for that." But Welch had numbers. He had proof. Soldiers who received sterilized treatment survived 3 times more often than those treated the old way. He traveled to France. He walked through field hospitals and front-line dressing stations. He showed surgeons how to sterilize instruments on the move. He taught nurses new wound care procedures. He studied how infection spread in trenches, where mud wasn't just mud. It was sewage, manure, gasoline, and blood. Each step was a fight. Commanders wanted faster operations, not cleaner ones. Welch refused to bend. In a hospital courtyard near Verdun, he performed a demonstration in front of skeptical officers. He held up a scalpel. This, he said quietly, kills more soldiers than machine guns. That was the moment the military listened. Within months, Welch's sterilization protocols were adopted across the American Expeditionary Force. By the war's end, thousands of soldiers survived wounds that would have been fatal in 1914. He didn't carry a rifle. He carried a set of sterilized forceps, and he changed the war. While Welch saved lives far from the trenches, another unnamed American was getting ready to shape the battle itself. His name was Isaac Newton Lewis, a former U.S. Army officer, an engineer, a tinkerer, a stubborn man who believed machines could replace men on the battlefield. He designed a weapon the U.S. military dismissed. They said it was too complicated. They said America didn't need it. Lewis knew otherwise. He packed his prototype into a trunk and sailed to Europe. If America wouldn't listen, someone else would. He visited Belgium. Belgian officers tested the weapon, a lightweight, air-cooled, shoulder-fired automatic gun that could be carried by one man. They fired it. They were stunned. The weapon didn't jam. It didn't overheat. It could fire 550 rounds per minute while soldiers sprinted or crawled. The world called it the Lewis gun. The Germans gave it another name, the Devil's Paintbrush. It changed how men moved on the battlefield. Before the Lewis gun, machine guns were stationary, heavy, mounted on tripods, impossible to move while firing. With Lewis's invention, infantry suddenly had mobility. At Cantigny, American troops launched their first attack. The German army expected them to retreat. Instead, they advanced under fire, held ground, and repelled counterattacks for 2 days straight. At Château Thierry, Marines formed a firing line and cut down waves of German stormtroopers. At Belleau Wood, the German officers reported back to headquarters, "American Marines are not men. They are bulldogs." That wasn't entirely true. They were boys. Boys who learned to become men under machine gun fire. They carried Lewis guns on their backs. They wore masks refined from Welch's sanitation principles. They maneuvered using intelligence extracted from Yardley's cracked codes. Every unknown American, the doctor, the inventor, the codebreaker, the forgotten infantryman, the reluctant hero, had become part of the same unstoppable machine. The climax of American involvement didn't occur in a single moment. It occurred in many. In a trench near Soissons, where an American machine gunner fired until the barrel of his weapon glowed red. In a hospital near Reims, where a nurse cleaned shrapnel wounds using Welch's sterilization method, saving a teenager from Ohio who would have died just months earlier. In an underground hut in Paris, where Yardley decoded a German message indicating troop movement, allowing the Allies to intercept a planned attack before it began. And in the Argonne forest, where Alvin York crawled through brush and changed history. York heard the rattle of enemy guns. He saw his comrades fall. He moved silently, one shot at a time. No panic, no hesitation. Years of hunting in Tennessee had trained his instinct: aim, breathe, fire. He used distance, timing, patience. He waited for German soldiers to rise from behind cover. He conserved ammunition. He used the environment. He didn't think about medals or honor or legacy. He thought, no one else is going to do this, so I will. By the end of the engagement, silence fell over the battlefield. The smoke cleared. Germans walked toward him with hands raised. York guided them back to his unit. Some stared at him, not with hatred but disbelief. How could one man do this? He didn't know. Heroes rarely do. York returned from the war to a small farmhouse and refused to capitalize on his fame. He turned down movie deals. He refused to endorse advertisements. He said, "A man should never profit from the blood of others." Johnson never asked for recognition. Yardley never asked for glory. Welch never asked for fame. Lewis never asked for vengeance. They shared one belief: what matters isn't whether your name is remembered. What matters is whether your actions made a difference. As the German front collapsed and their troops retreated, the Allies began to advance. American troops pushed through towns that had been occupied for years. Villagers wept as the American flag appeared over shattered rooftops. Factories restarted. Rail lines reopened. Convoys moved safely through seas because Yardley's code-breaking neutralized submarines. Field hospitals returned thousands of wounded men to the front because Welch transformed medical care. Infantry units held ground because Lewis's gun allowed movement under fire. The morale of entire regiments rose because they heard stories of Henry Johnson fighting off an entire German patrol. The German high command lost hope because Alvin York proved the American spirit wasn't theoretical, why it was unstoppable. These weren't generals, these were ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things. Their actions, individually small, collectively enormous, pushed the war toward a tipping point. Germany began negotiating. Diplomats met in railway cars and government offices, tracing surrender terms on maps smudged with fingerprints and dust. The guns finally fell silent on November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m. Men didn't cheer at first. They listened to the quiet. Then, slowly shouts of relief echoed across the trenches. Some cried, some laughed. Some simply stared at the sky and wondered why they were still alive when their closest friends were gone. Paris erupted into celebration. Crowds kissed soldiers in the streets. Church bells rang across continents. Flags flew from rooftops. But behind the noise of victory was the truth. The war had been changed, won, by men who were never supposed to be heroes. A doctor with sterilized tools. An inventor with a rejected design. A codebreaker with a pencil. A forgotten soldier with a knife. A farmer with a rifle. They didn't seek recognition. They just answered the moment, and the world changed because of them. The guns were silent, but the war was not over. The men who changed the course of World War I returned home to a country that barely understood what they had done. Crowds cheered them in parades. Bands played in broad city streets. Confetti rained from rooftops. But once the noise faded, so did the memory of their names. Ships carried young Americans back across the Atlantic. They stepped onto piers in New York, Boston, and Norfolk wearing worn uniforms, carrying duffel bags that smelled of mud and smoke and blood. Mothers cried. Fathers embraced sons who looked decades older than when they left. The newspapers printed headlines about victory. Politicians took photographs. Generals published memoirs. But the men who mattered most slipped back into ordinary life. Henry Johnson returned to New York. He had been the hero of the Argonne Forest, the man who took on a raiding party alone with only a bolo knife and refusal to die. In France, he was a decorated warrior, honored with the Croix de Guerre. In America, he was a porter again, reduced to carrying luggage in train stations. Wounds tore open beneath his uniform. His bones hurt every day. He couldn't work. He couldn't afford treatment. He had given everything. His country gave nothing. He died alone. Forgotten. Unrecognized. Not until nearly a century later did the United States finally award him the Medal of Honor. A recognition too late for the man himself, but not too late to correct the record. His legacy now stands as truth. The battlefield does not care about race, and courage does not ask for permission. Dr. Welch returned to a hospital, not to applause, but to silence. No cheering crowds, no medals. He simply began working again, teaching future doctors how to prevent infection, how to treat wounds, how to save the wounded instead of burying them. Before the war, a soldier with a deep shrapnel wound had little chance of survival. After Welch, thousands lived. No monuments bear his face. His honor is every life that did not end in a trench. Herbert Yardley expected to continue cryptology work after the armistice. He had cracked German codes, rerouted convoys, and saved ships full of men from unseen torpedoes. His success created the first American cryptologic intelligence unit, the Black Chamber. Then the war ended, and the government shut it down. The nation didn't want spies anymore. They wanted peace. Yardley was told to burn everything: files, notes, analysis, the history of his work. Instead, he saved what he could. In time, modern American intelligence agencies would rediscover his methods and build upon them. Yardley proved that wars are not only fought on the battlefield, but also in the silence of intercepted messages and broken ciphers. No one outside those rooms knew what he had done. He saved lives without firing a bullet. The inventor Isaac Newton Lewis was offered no recognition by his own country. The U.S. Army had rejected his weapon, calling it unnecessary and flawed. European armies embraced it instead. The Lewis gun defended trenches fired from aircraft mounted on tanks, a weapon that gave mobility to men pinned under machine gun fire. Lewis watched from afar. He watched as American soldiers fought with the gun he designed. He watched as generals praised the effectiveness of a weapon he had begged his own army to adopt. History remembers the gun, it forgets the man, and Alvin York and the reluctant soldier who captured 132 Germans returned to Tennessee. Movie studios brought contracts. Newspapers wanted interviews. Companies wanted him to endorse products. York refused all of it. He walked his farmland and tried to understand the world again. His neighbors asked if he missed France. He answered softly, "I just did what I could." He built a school, not a monument. He taught children, not soldiers. He never asked to be famous. He asked to be useful. Years passed. The war disappeared into dusty textbooks. Names faded. The world moved on to a second war that dwarfed the first. But the truth remained. World War I was not won by power or strategy or numbers alone. It was won by ordinary Americans who rose to extraordinary moments. Men whose lives did not fit into headlines. A surgeon sterilizing tools inside a tent while artillery shook the walls. A black soldier refusing to surrender when surrounded in the dark. A codebreaker tracing symbols on paper while ships burned at sea. An inventor watching the army ignore his creation until it saved their own. A farm boy walking alone into machine gun fire. They did not ask for legacy. They earned it. War is not shaped by those who plan it. War is shaped by those who carry it. The unknown soldier is not unknown because he lacked greatness. He is unknown because he never paused long enough to demand attention. History records the speeches of presidents. History records the signatures of generals. But victory, true victory, lies in the unrecorded actions of men whose names nearly vanished. Their legacy lives in the world they changed. Every modern battlefield medic uses sterile procedures born from Welch's reforms. Every modern intelligence agency traces its roots to Yardley's first code-breaking room. Every infantry squad that moves under fire owes its tactics to Lewis's vision of mobility. Every Medal of Honor recipient who fights impossible odds stands on the shoulders of Henry Johnson. Every soldier who believes that one person can turn the tide continues the spirit of Alvin York. The forgotten built the foundation the remembered now stand on. The war ended. The world moved on. But courage does not fade because people forget the names attached to it. The final debt we owe these men is remembrance, not because they need it, but because we do. We need to remember that greatness does not always arrive in uniform glory. Sometimes greatness arrives quietly, in a doctor boiling instruments, in a codebreaker scribbling symbols, in an inventor tightening bolts on a prototype, in a lone soldier in the dark holding a knife deciding not to surrender. History is not shaped by the obvious. It is shaped by the unnoticed. The unknown Americans of World War I did not wait for permission to become important. They simply did what needed to be done. And because of that, the world was changed.